Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to do my BookTube Rewind for May. This is where I look back on my past month of BookTube watching and recommend some great videos and creators I've really been enjoying. May has been a pretty solid BookTube watching month for me. There's been so much great content that's been put out recently that I have a bunch of stuff to recommend to you. So without much further ado, let's just get straight into talking about these booktubers. So as you may know, in the month of May, Emily Henry's latest book, Great Big Beautiful Life, was published. So I saw there were a lot of people talking about Emily Henry, doing review videos of the newest book. But one video that I thought was particularly a standout came from Elizabeth over at Plant-Based Bride. And she talked about a phenomenon that I think I've kind of noticed, but never really delved too much into, which is the fact that Emily Henry it's not just that she's a Marmite author, it's that within her works, fans of Emily Henry have very different opinions on each book and where it ranks for them internally. And it's so odd how there is no consensus on what is a good Emily Henry book. Everybody's opinions vary so wildly. There just seems to be no consensus. I notice it all the time. I think my favourite of her works is People You Meet on Vacation, or You and Me on Vacation as it's alternatively called. But I know so many people who that is their least favourite Emily Henry. Like, they cannot even imagine why it is I would like it. But then for me, my least favourite for hers is Beach Read, and I know so many people who love that book. And so yeah, Elizabeth did this great video, over an hour long if I'm remembering correctly, and it is Why No One Can Agree on Emily Henry, which gives her personal ranking and opinion on each of these books and her discussion for why it is that Emily Henry's books tend to be so polarising. There's also been a really great string recently of people talking about being a better reader, the difficulty of the books that we're reading, whether or not we're smart enough to read these books. And so I have a few videos to recommend if you are similarly thinking about this. Firstly, Chinzia over at Lady of the Library did this great video on what if you're not smart enough to read the classics. Spoiler, you are. About this mindset that so many of us can get into, and I definitely have been recently, of wanting to read the classics, wanting to read these great pillars of literature, but just feeling like you yourself are not equipped to do so. The imposter syndrome that you can feel. And I definitely get this way. I think it probably contributes to the fact that I've read so few classics in the last couple of years, despite the fact that they were a major part of my reading, especially in 2020 and 2021, is the second that you put a camera on yourself, you feel like you are an authority, even though that's the furthest thing from what I think about myself and my reading, or at least that other people perceive that you think that you're an authority and therefore are more likely to criticise you if you have a wrong take. And I just really like Chinzia unpacking this notion of not being smart enough and just really gently encouraging you to take a step into classics and that they are not as hard as they may appear. Another great discussion video on a similar topic was Joanna Reeds and David over at Four Corners of the Page, who did this great discussion on book difficulty. Are we making the conversation too easy? And they really break down what does it mean when we say that a book is difficult, how nebulous the term difficult is, and is there any value in reading difficult books, or are we just forcing ourselves to read something we really don't want to read, and is that actually going to put more readers off of reading? It's a really great in-depth live stream and I definitely recommend checking it out. And then for a great video that just kind of rounds this all off, I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing this, but Mr. Sosotris Reads did a great video called How to Be a Better Critical Reader. Not just zooming through books one after the other, but actually mulling over what you are reading, the value in being a critical reader, and that doesn't have to suck the fun out of reading, but in fact adds a lot of value to your reading, and you end up retaining more as a result. I really enjoyed Claire Fenby's video on why you should read Mrs. Dalloway. As you may know, if you've been keeping up with the bookish world, it is the 100th anniversary of the publication of Mrs. Dalloway, and Claire Fenby actually hosted a readathon in May, encouraging people to read Mrs. Dalloway, whether it's reading it for the first time, whether it's a reread, and this video is just a great summation of why Mrs. Dalloway has endured. So from a classic writer to a modern classic, with the recent announcement of Percival Everett winning the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction for his novel James, Brian over at Bookish did a really great video on where not to start with Percival Everett. This is a series that is ongoing on his channel where he takes an author that he's read a good amount of work by, and whereas the typical video is about where to start, Brian actually gives really good recommendations on why a certain work is actually not the best place to start, what difficulties you might come across in reading more difficult or obscure books from their back catalogue. And I think since a lot of people's eyes are going to be on Percival Everett right now, this is a really great introduction video. And then my final individual video recommendation for BookTube is the brothers Gwyn, who recently did a great recommendation video on ancient history books, where they talked about books both fiction and non-fiction that are about ancient history or set in the ancient world. I've recently done my updated historical fiction timeline video, and I know there is an absolute dearth of books that are set in the ancient world, because a lot of the time the kinds of books that I tend to read that are set in the ancient world tend to be Greek myth retellings, and I don't don't count those towards my historical fiction, mostly because there isn't really a set timeline, but this is adding a whole host of great books to my roster, and so I definitely recommend checking it out. If you watch a lot of UK-based booktubers, you may know that there was a recent booktuber meetup in London that was hosted by Katie over at BooksandThings. I myself attended this booktuber meetup and it was such good fun. Rather than going on a bookshop crawl, which is what we normally do, we ended up going out for food, and then later Katie had booked this great location, the London Night Cafe, and we just sat for hours chatting and reading. It was basically like doing live reading sprints, and since coming back from that trip I have really enjoyed watching all the various booktubers who were there, who did vlogs of the day. It was just been really lovely to relive that experience. And then for another little booktube trend that I've noticed, I don't know, because we're getting into the warmer months, whether or not people just naturally feel like summer is a great time to start booktube, maybe because your commitments are a little bit lower, maybe people just have more time so it comes to mind more. But I've seen a few videos encouraging people to start booktube, which I've really been enjoying. In quite quick succession, I saw Life on Books video on why now is the best time to start booktube. I also saw a really great video from Randy Ray on the same topic, and also recently he came out with a video on booktube terminology called How to Speak Booktube, which is all about the different terms and phrases that we tend to use on booktube without really thinking, maybe a first time watcher is going to be a bit confused by this. And this video is just a really great breakdown of all of those terms and what they mean. But then also Kerry from Bookish Adventures in Wellbeing did a great video on booktube things that I wish I knew when I started. Rather than just giving the guidance of you should just start now, actually breaking down the lessons that she's learned, advice that she wishes that she had had. And it was just a really lovely, informative, and I think encouraging video. Now moving on to tag videos that have cropped up recently. There have actually been quite a few that I've noticed. Firstly, one that I have done myself, if it's not gone up already it will be soon, which is the BookTube behind the scenes tag. This was created by Robert G. Reader of Books, and very much does as it says on the tin, giving viewers an insight into our recording process, our planning process for making booktube videos, maybe addressing some questions you might have always had. It's similar to a booktube tag that Shelley Swearingen did a few years back called the Behind the Booktube tag, but the reason that I was quite keen to do this one is there are some different questions in here that are not crossed over from that video, and it's also really interesting to see how my answers have changed to it a few years on. There's also been the TBR Fun or Not tag created by Candy over at the Great Literary Rabbit Hole, which is very much about your relationship to your TBR, how you manage your TBR, how many books you have on it, do you participate in different TBR games, do you like to keep your TBR as small as possible, or do you like having lots and lots of options? We talk a lot about TBRs on BookTube, but maybe we don't tend to really analyse the nitty-gritty of our relationship to TBRs, and that's really what this tag highlights. There's also been the High School Required Reading tag, created by Nicole over at Noteworthy Fiction, which is based around high school required reading lists. The BookTube Pet tag, created by Caitlin at Spill the Threads, and Becky over at Book Reviews with Becky. For those of you who are lucky enough to have pets, introducing them to your channel and giving you some bookish questions to mull over that are to do with your pets. For example, would your pet be a hero or a villain in a book? Which seems very fun. Another Robert G. Reader of Books original tag was the What's Next book tag, which has a lot of questions on how you go about picking your next read. And then finally there is the Audible era tag, or as I came across it the first time, I'm in my audiobook era tag. This was created by Jess over at Honest Fiction, and is about your relationship to audiobooks, your relationships to audiobooks, your favourite narrators, your favourite platforms to listen to. As I am myself a big audiobook listener, maybe this is the tag that I should do. And then finally talking about things that are coming up in June. Now I do apologise, I'm filming this video on the 2nd of June, and by the time this comes up it will be a bit later. I do apologise I'm not getting this out ahead of time, but I do believe that most of these events, if not all of them, will still be ongoing by the time that I post this video. Firstly, we have Joyreading June, which is hosted by Jack over at Spread Bookjoy, Gemma over at Gemma Brooks and Charlie Brooks Reads, and was originally created by Alice over at Alice and the Giant Bookshelf, and is being hosted in honour of her, and is really about pursuing reading joyfully. Jen the Librarian is kicking off her Thomas Hardy Readathon, or Read-along I should say, which is going to be going month by month, reading Thomas Hardy's books in publication order, so starting off with Desperate Remedies. Alongside this, if you want a bit more classics reading in your life, Claire Fenby is also hosting the Bronte Readalong. As a big fan of Tenant of Wildfell Hall and Agnes Grey, as somebody who does believe that Anne Bronte is an underrated Bronte, I definitely support this. Also from the 6th to the 12th of June, there is going to be a little readathon celebrating 10 years of Books and Things. Katie is hosting a week-long readathon in which the prompts are to read a classic and to read a work of historical fiction in celebration of the fact that she is hitting 10 years of making YouTube videos. I am also co-hosting a readathon. This month is the Historical Fiction Readathon, which was created by Shelley over at Shelley Swearingen. As I say, I am co-hosting, as well as Gloria Z. Thompson, Brittany over at Literarily Smitten, and Melinda over at Web of Stories. You'll have seen me mention this many times, but to participate you only need to read one historical fiction book, but we each have contributed a prompt that you could also use to guide your reading. The Book Hermit is hosting Hermie's Hunger Games. This is running from the 1st of June through to the 6th of July, challenging viewers to read all 5 of the novels within the Hunger Games universe. I won't be participating as I have recently done this. I've recently reread the original trilogy and Sunrise on the Reaping. I haven't yet gotten to Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, so this actually might be a good prompt for me. But as somebody who recently reread the Hunger Games trilogy and was like, oh, this is just as good as I remember, if not better, I can definitely endorse this one. There is also the Summer of Steinbeck, which is hosted by numerous different booktubers, of whom I will link down below. They will be reading The Grapes of Wrath in June, followed by East of Eden in July. Also for June, there is June on the Range, an annual tradition on BookTube in which people are encouraged to read more westerns. Another great summer tradition on BookTube is BookTrek, where for June, July and August you are encouraged to read Star Trek novels. I have never watched nor read anything to do with Star Trek, so this is definitely one that I'm out of my depth for, but I will link down the creators down below who are hosting this, who can give a lot more information than I can. And it doesn't stop here. There is also Summer of Sport 2025, perfect for the summer months, encouraging you to read a little bit more sport fiction and non-fiction. There is Big Book Summer, which is starting in June but carrying on to the 1st of September, hosted by Sue Jackson and Melinda over at Web of Stories, in which you are encouraged to read books over 400 pages. If you've got a holiday coming up, this might be the perfect time. And then finally there is CaribAThon, hosted from the 8th to the 22nd of June by Comfy Cozy Up and Run Right Reads, in which we are encouraged to read books written by Caribbean authors. So there are certainly a lot of things that you can get stuck into for June. And a lot of these readathons actually continue into July and August. So definitely do not panic, do not stress, there is plenty of time to get to these challenges. So there we go, those are all of the booktubers and videos that I wanted to talk about for this month's Rewind. Do let me know if any booktube videos that you have particularly enjoyed in May. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.